Every week, a lot happens in Parliament. Debates rage, bills are discussed, and laws are introduced. So it's easy to feel like you don't quite know what's going on in the chamber. So we're lifting the lid and telling you exactly what happened this week in Parliament. This week we saw a debate on genocide and trade bills, as well as another on the appointment of a new Electoral Commissioner. On Tuesday, we saw a vote on a very controversial amendment to the trade bill. The amendment was proposed in the House of Lords and then passed back to the Commons. And basically, it proposed a clause which meant that the government would be asked to take another look at any trade deal with a country deemed to be committing genocide. The act of labelling a country as committing genocide would be down to the UK's High Court, where previously it's been done at the international judicial level. Shadow Foreign Secretary Emily Thornberry summed it up with her remarks.
It is understandable and right that many members today will focus their contributions on the situation in China and the plight of the Uyghur people. And we have all read with horror the first-hand accounts of torture and extrajudicial killings, mass incarceration in detention camps, forced sterilisation and abortions, servitude and slave labour. It shames the world that this is happening in our lifetime, it disgraces the government of China, and it is absolutely right that if a UK trade deal with Beijing is proposed or agreed, then representatives of the Uyghur community should be able to seek a ruling from the High Court that the crimes they're facing in China meet the criteria for a charge of genocide, in turn requiring the UK government to consider revoking that trade deal. And when the Right Honourable Gentleman has an opportunity to look at the amendment, the compromise amendment as it's been called, he will see that that is what is being suggested.
Speaking for the government was Minister of Trade Greg Hands, and his argument against the amendment was that while stressing the importance the government placed on issues relating to genocide in other countries, judges should not be the ones deciding how trade in the UK should work.
They pose significant legal and other problems and so cannot be accepted by the government. Lord's Amendment 3 from Lord Alton seeks to revoke trade agreements where the High Court of England and Wales makes a preliminary determination regarding genocide. This would in effect take prerogative powers to conduct international relations with respect to trade out of the hands of government. This goes to the heart of the separation of powers in Britain's constitutional system. To accept this specific amendment would allow the High Court to frustrate, even revoke, trade agreements entered into by the government and approved after parliamentary scrutiny. This is a completely unprecedented and unacceptable erosion of the royal prerogative and not something the government could support.
Conservative MP Tom Tugendhat, one of the most well-known figures against the government on Tuesday, had this to say in response, highlighting how a ruling has always been made by judges, just on an international scale.
Because genocide is unique. Genocide is distinct. It is much, much worse than any other crime, even though it makes up others. And that's why we have always reserved this power to the courts. We've always said that this is not a political tool. This is not a tool for politicians to wield against trade rivals or enemies. It's a charge that can only be wielded by a court. And the way we've done that is we've tried to act together. We've allowed this charge to sit only with international courts. And for many years, you could see why that was the case. You could see why that was the case because that ensured that we all acted together. That if there was a charge and it was proven, then we were all as one responding to an abuse against the whole of humanity. Because genocide is a crime against the whole of humanity. But sadly, the way that the world has changed means that the obstacles we're facing in our international institutions is now becoming overwhelming. We have a choice, and that choice is either to allow the current system to stand and to say that in reality we will never again recognise genocide, or it's to say that there is a way through this, and it's by trusting our institutions and our judges, and recognising that our judges and our legal institutions are actually trusted worldwide. You don't have to take my word for this. Look at how many foreign cases are pressed through our courts.
It's thought that the issue has really come to the table because of increased attention on the human rights abuses inflicted on Xinjiang's Uyghur Muslims by the Chinese government. Of course, China isn't the only country engaging in human rights abuses, but because of it being topical, the government was keen to point out that if the amendment was to deal with China in particular, then it would be futile.
And Madam Deputy Speaker, this is crucial to understand. We don't have a bilateral trade agreement with China. There is no trade deal with China to revoke. Not a single person in Xinjiang, the people we are trying to benefit, would benefit from this amendment.
So the government was clearly against the proposals. Normally, with such a large majority, the government would have an easy time with this vote, but not on this occasion. In the end, the government only won by a very narrow margin, 319 to 308, due to the high number of Conservative rebels. If this story's got you interested, then stay tuned to This Week in Parliament, as this issue is set to stay around much longer, with more potential amendments in the coming weeks. On Wednesday, we saw a motion raised in the House of Commons to appoint a new Electoral Commissioner. The Electoral Commission was introduced in 2000, following the election of Tony Blair. The power it has is stipulated in the Political Parties Elections and Referendum Act, although its power is pretty limited. For example, while it can enforce financial limitations on parties and regulate the restrictions of parties, it cannot regulate the contents of campaign literature, nor can it enforce purdah, the time between an election being called and taking place, where parties, the government and the civil service have special rules they need to follow. In fact, many of these issues are down to the police to enforce, such as on misinformation. Anyway, regardless of their powers, the Electoral Commission's main jobs are registering parties, regulating finances in elections, running public information campaigns in the run-up to elections, running referendums, and publishing reports on regulating and modernising the electoral process in the UK. The exact objectives of the Commission are laid out by its commissioners. There are 4 nominated commissioners, 3 of which are put forward by the 3 largest parties in the House of Commons. The 4th is put forward by the smaller parties, and this is what was being debated on Wednesday. The smaller parties have put forward their choices, and the Speaker's Committee had to decide on who they thought was the best fit. The decision was made that Alex Attwood, nominated by the Social Democratic and Labour Party of Northern Ireland, was the best choice. About this nominee, Leader of the House Jacob Rees-Mogg had this to say.
Mr Attwood has significant political experience in Northern Ireland. He served as a Belfast City Councillor, representing West Belfast. He was an elected member of the Northern Ireland Assembly between 1998 and 2017 and held ministerial office in the Northern Ireland Executive. The interview panel found Mr Attwood to be an impressive candidate who met all the essential criteria for the position. If the appointment were made, Mr Attwood would serve as an Electoral Commissioner for 3 years. I hope that the House will support this appointment, and I wish Mr Attwood success in this important role, and I commend this motion to the House.
So, although Rees-Mogg was happy with the appointment, there was one notable figure who wasn't, Peter Bone. Okay, technically he was happy with the appointee, but had some serious misgivings about the Electoral Commission itself. Bone is an ardent Leave figure, and following the EU referendum, the Electoral Commission did look into some key figures of the Leave campaign in relation to electoral finance. It's important to bear this in mind when watching his following criticisms.
Now, the process as outlined by the Leader of the House was exactly how it happened, and it is recorded in the 6th report of the Speaker's Committee. But of course, that committee does meet in private, so we don't really know what the thinking is about the actual Electoral Commission. I mean, we do know that the Speaker's Committee has rejected the application for the existing chairman for a new term of office, which would imply, I would have thought, some criticism, at least, of the way the Commission has been run. Now, I think that the situation is so grave and what the Electoral Commission has done is so wicked that I want to know what Mr Attwood's views are on certain things.
So, for those of you who didn't quite follow, Bone has criticised the fact that the committee met in private, and it means that he can't find out exactly what the nominated commissioner's views are on certain things. Later in this speech, Mr Bone claimed that there was a chance that the commission is abolished in the middle of this year, or possibly reformed on the back of an investigation into things such as the exact powers the commission has. As we mentioned earlier, the Commission is not actually that powerful, so perhaps Mr Attwood is appointed as Commissioner and then sees his responsibilities increase hugely. Anyway, these are the two major views presented about the Electoral Commission in the debate. Despite this disagreement, MPs voted to recommend him to the Queen, who now has to officially approve him, which realistically she's going to do. And we'll leave it up to you to make your own views about the Electoral Commission and how the commissioners themselves are selected. If you want to be updated with what happens in Parliament next week, then be sure to subscribe to the channel. Or if you prefer to listen to the weekly update, then subscribe to the Daily Briefing podcast feed, where you'll find a daily summary of the week's news events and every Saturday, This Week in Parliament.